Hi, and welcome to Crypto Chats, a podcast that explores cryptids, alien encounters, and ghost stories. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Crypto Chats. This week we're going to talk about the Ozark Howler, the big cat of the Midwest. So let's get into it. So, in the 1800s, people from a bunch of remote areas in Texas, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Arkansas started seeing this creature that they described as like a bear-sized, basically cat, just like a big cat with glowing red eyes and horns, and like thick, shaggy black hair. They started calling it the Ozark Howler because that's like generally like where the Ozark Mountains are, to my knowledge. I think that's true. And it kind of just like went with the name. Part of it too is that the Ozark Howler made this crazy noise that was somewhere between a wolf's howl, an elk's cry, and the laugh of a hyena. So you can kind of like, if you picture those sounds together, you can kind of see how a howler came to be. And it kind of just like, this creature was roaming these areas for like a super long time, not really doing anything to anybody, but just like kind of hanging around. And you know, people were reporting it and being like, what the fuck is that? Which is fair because a bear-sized cat sounds, I'll be honest, to me that sounds great because I love cats, but I can understand being out in the woods, you know, cutting up some wood or hunting for food or whatever and being like, holy shit, that's a big cat. So for a while, people experiencing these sightings just kind of assumed that they had stumbled across a new species of animal, like a new type of, you know, mountain cat or something, and basically just thought it was a misidentified or unrecognized big cat. But then as the sightings started to grow, some people started to kind of tie it into British folklore and other, you know, folklore from around the world, and thought that it could potentially be a variation of basically like the United States variation of like some folklore from around the world, like the dark dog of death or like the black shuck, or even a hellhound. If you're not familiar with hellhounds, they're basically these terrifying dogs that had like three eyes and would drag you to hell if you saw them. Like, if you saw them, basically that was your omen that you were going to die. That was your sign that your life was about to be cut short, because seeing the hellhound was basically just an indication that you were about to die, and they were said to drag you to hell. And so a lot of people just kind of got scared of them and were like, okay, well, if this folklore ties into this creature, then we should not be excited to see it. We should not like want to run into it because that will ultimately mean our demise. Which I think is kind of fair. There's a lot of creatures that I wouldn't want to run into, not because I would see them as a bad omen, but just because I don't really want to be face to face throwing hands with a bear in the middle of the woods, or a moose. Y'all know how I feel about moose. But I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense. There was like a whole moment of like mass hysteria surrounding this unidentified creature where people were like, oh shit, that thing's gonna kill me. And in a more like, I don't know, I guess a scarier way, like the idea of like being attacked by a wild animal obviously is not super fun to anybody, but the idea of being dragged to hell from a mysterious creature with a bunch of eyes definitely seems scarier, I'm sure. So there was like a whole period of time where people were just like bugging out about seeing these creatures. And the Howler's like first sighting was in the early 1800s, so you can imagine the like kind of widespread panic that happened back then as opposed to how it would happen today. But it's interesting because the very first sighting was supposedly by the explorer Daniel Boone in the early 1800s, and he was said to have shot at and killed the creature, but clearly that claim could not be supported because we still are out here seeing them today. So, I mean, I guess it can't not be supported because we still see them, but it was not supported because, you know, they never found a body, found any evidence, whatever. And it's definitely realistic that there is a pack of them and not just one, at least in my eyes. I like to think that, like, most cryptids in general are part of a larger cryptid family. There's a lot of them to me that would make sense to have like a population of them instead of just one. And the Ozark Howlers is definitely one of those for me. But some of the sightings that have been reported over the years, and like these are not specific sightings, these are like mass sightings, where like a bunch of people very suddenly saw this creature in huge numbers, and there was just like kind of a surge in sightings. And the first one was in 1846. There was a mass sighting of howlers in Red Oak, Arkansas. I think that says oak. My handwriting's really bad, so I can't actually tell if that's what I'm reading or not. But anyway, there was a huge mass report of sightings. I think if I remember correctly, a couple hundred people sighted this creature, and we're all bugging out about it. And eventually it kind of moved on from that area, and they stopped seeing it as frequently. So then in 1998, there was another mass report in Branson, Missouri. And again, a couple hundred people saw this creature, and everyone was like freaked out, like having a bad time, and eventually it moved on to somewhere else. And then 2011, there was a mass report in Jasper, Arkansas. And that's, you know, pretty recent. Like 2011 was like, oh, well, God, 10 years ago now. But still, like in terms of like, you know, time, that's still kind of recent. It's definitely more recent than 1846. But there was like a supposed sighting in 2015, and this ended up being like confirmed as a hoax. But it's still kind of cool because I think what this person created to try to support this hoax was kind of neat. And somebody claimed to have photographed an Ozark Howler in the Devil's Den State Park in 2015. They did not. They did not do that. They photographed, it almost looks like a goat, but it's kind of cool. It looks like a homemade like prop, I guess, to try to fool people. It's kind of cool. Honestly, if I were given the opportunity, I would probably try and buy it because it's pretty neat looking. And unfortunately, it is a hoax, which is kind of a bummer. But still kind of cool, still kind of neat. So in my research on this cryptid, I learned something kind of interesting. And it's not super crazy related to what I'm talking about, but it's kind of neat, and I thought it was fun to bring up. So in the time period between 2005 and 2010, there was a family living in the Boston Mountains of Arkansas that set out trail cams because they were seeing what they thought was potentially a cougar kind of roaming their property, and they were kind of worried about it. So they put out a bunch of trail cams, and they caught a creature on the trail cams, and they ended up sending it to some other people to like identify the animal in it, and it ended up being a big cat that was like similar to a cougar, probably a mountain lion, and the wildlife officials from the area refused to acknowledge that there could possibly be a big cat living in this area because it just wasn't wildly possible. And they went on just to be like, you know, it's probably an animal that escaped, like it was someone's pet and it got out, blah, blah, blah. But through this, they refused to acknowledge that there was a breeding problem of cougars in Arkansas. They were breeding like crazy, and people were seeing these cats all the time. Now, in my head, that doesn't really go too hand in hand with the howler sightings, just because of the like appearance differences in mountain lions and cougars and an Ozark howler. I mean, it could, like, if you're seeing it at night, that could make sense, but generally cougars and mountain lions aren't black, and that's the most consistent eyewitness, I guess, attribute to the Ozark Howlers is that they are black or are very dark in color. So it kind of like, it only half, I guess, solves that problem. Not that it's a problem, but like it only like half explains it. Because again, like if you see something like that at night, you might not be able to tell that it's like actually tan. But yeah, there are like a lot of people in Arkansas that hear the sounds of an Ozark Howler at night, and don't necessarily see it, but they can hear what sounds like a hyena at night. And like obviously in the United States, we don't really have hyenas. It's not really something that we have in this country. So it's definitely kind of odd to be hearing a hyena at night in the woods in Arkansas. And there was a family that started hearing this hyena around their house. This is a separate family. This is not the same family as the trail cams. But there was another family that was hearing this hyena-like noise around their house at night. And eventually they went outside, and from a higher elevation, they could see, you know, what appeared to them as a large, very large cat that was black. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who really think that the Ozark Howlers are a hoax, and I can kind of understand that. You know, like Lauren Coleman was interviewed once about it, and basically came to the conclusion that like there was like one person with multiple aliases that were kind of like spreading this information, and ultimately it was a hoax. But to me, especially keeping tabs on like some of the big cat sightings around me, like they're in Maine, there's a large black cat that is, you know, too big to be a domestic cat and too big to be like a mountain lion or a cougar, is reported, you know, every couple of years. At the Cryptozoology Museum in Maine, in Portland, there is a whole spreadsheet. It's not really a spreadsheet, it's like a map with push pins. But there's a whole like breakdown of the various sightings of this, what they call mysterious cat, in Maine. And, you know, I read things, I see stuff on the internet, and I see articles about, you know, giant cat sightings and stuff. I just don't think it's totally unrealistic to think that there could potentially be like a large cat. Do I think it's a hellhound? Probably not. Do I think that it could potentially be like just like a weird misidentified giant cat? Yes, I do. I do think that could be the case. I can also like, you know, see it being just like a weird mutated mountain lion or something. You know, there's a lot of possibilities here, but until somebody sees what they think is an Ozark Howler and, you know, grabs it and, you know, they fully figure it out, no one really knows. But yeah, I don't know. I can understand the hoax aspect, but I don't know. I can see it both ways. You guys have listened to my podcast this many times. You know how I feel. I want to believe that everything is everything it says it is. Just because that's how my brain works. But I will say, though, regardless of if you believe that the Ozark Howlers are a myth or not, if they're a hoax to you, or if you think that they could be real, regardless of how you feel, the Ozark area, the Ozark Mountains, is like batshit crazy, and there's so much cool shit that happens there. So even if you don't believe in that one specific thing, there are so many others, like the Boggy Creek Monster. There's a bunch of random just like disappearances. There's people that just like go missing randomly, which I think a lot of you know how I feel about those, you know, mysterious disappearances and all that stuff. I love it. I think it's great. I don't love it for the people that it affects, and I don't love it for their families, but I love it as a phenomena. But there's also like a bunch of really intense killings that have happened there, and like it's very, very haunted place. There's like Momo, like there's like a lot of just like horrible, really heavy stuff that have happened in the Ozark Mountains. And I think eventually I'm going to do, you know, an episode on all of it because it's all very cool to me. So even if you don't really subscribe fully to the Ozark Howlers idea, you can definitely subscribe to any of the other things that have happened in the Ozark Mountains, and it's still like pretty neat. That's pretty much all I have for you guys today. I will be back next week with another episode, and yeah, thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to follow me and, I don't know, like the podcast, I guess. And stay tuned for next week's episode. Thanks, guys. Bye.